Okay, so
I feel like Gordon Ramsay.
I actually have no idea what this means, but my students taught me today, so I guess I'm pretty cool. Alright, so in today's episode, we're gonna talk about tourism. So if you're curious and want to know more about this chapter of tourism and how you approach it, watch all the way to the end, and hopefully this video will be helpful in your revision. Now, it doesn't matter if you're a core geography student or an elective geography student, basically you have to study the chapter of tourism. So in this video, we're going to talk about a couple of things such as a common misconception, as well as how do you unpack this chapter to help you in your revision. And so let me know if you have any questions down in the comments below, or you can DM me on questions on Instagram and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And let's go. Is tourism the way to go? Now, this is the overarching question for the chapter of tourism. So before we actually answer yes or no, we gotta first ask ourselves, why is there even a need to ask this question in the first place? Right? You notice that around the world right now, there are so many countries that are investing their financial resources into the tourism sector. So does it mean that tourism will definitely bring about lots of benefits to the countries? Now, we also understand that tourism can bring about consequences to countries. So will the consequence actually hinder the economic development that countries are actually hoping to achieve with tourism? So let's first look at why is it that so many countries are investing so much into the tourism sector. We gotta first look at the general tourism trends, and in terms of international tourism as well as domestic tourism, in the past couple of decades you do notice that there's an increasing trend. Now, when I mention about increasing trend, right, it doesn't mean that it's just a straight line. Okay, it actually shows fluctuations, and the slight dips can be resulted due to let's say the outbreak of diseases or natural disasters or political instability, or it can even be due to recession, whereby people's disposable income have been reduced, and this will actually cause them to travel less frequently. But in totality, we do notice that more people are traveling, and the people who are traveling are actually traveling more frequently. So if you look at your textbook, there are actually three different reasons to explain this increasing trend. First being demand factors, second being destination factors, and the last one would be the developments in technology. So for demand factors, it can be explained by a couple of points. We can say that now in general, most of the people's disposable income have increased with economic development. So there are more job opportunities, their income have increased, and therefore this will enable them to have greater amount of disposable income as well as purchasing power, and therefore increase their desire to travel overseas. Now, apart from that, we can also explain how people's changing lifestyle as well as the increase in the amount of leisure time due to the availability of paid leaves has encouraged people to travel, and this has contributed to the general increase of tourism trends around the world. So apart from demand factors, of course, we have destination factors. Now we're going to understand how can the destination countries actually contribute to the increasing general global trend of tourism, and this has got to do with looking at what countries can offer in terms of its attractions, infrastructures and services, as well as whether information can be easily accessed. So common question that I always get from students would be, is there a need to study Gateway 1? Because we're actually looking at all the different types of tourism. So all the different possibilities, like, oh, places with rich culture would therefore be suitable for heritage tourism. Places with scenic beauty will actually appeal to more tourists and therefore is suitable for honeypot tourism. So is there really a need to study Gateway 1? In this case, it seems to be common sense. Now, if you think about this in a very logical manner, every country has its own characteristics, and the different characteristics will allow the country to have different types of attractions that can appeal to tourists. And therefore, this can allow the country to develop different types of tourism. And that's why when we're trying to explain how destination factors can actually help to contribute to the increasing trend of tourism around the world, then this point itself can actually be useful in your elaboration. Alright, so don't forget to read through Gateway 1. It's actually important, especially when you're talking about destination factors. Alright, so now let's move on to the third point and the third reason as to why there is an increasing trend, and that is due to developments in technology. Now, when you're explaining about developments in technology, transportation technology has been improving so much so that it's easier to travel, and therefore this allows people to travel more frequently, which contributes to the increasing trend of tourism. But at the same time, you can also choose to focus on the rise of budget airlines. So with budget airlines, talk about the 3 A's: accessibility, affordability, as well as availability. Now, these 3 A's are very useful, especially for human geography chapters. Now, in this case, if you're looking at budget airlines, of course, the first thing that comes to your mind is the increased affordability will entice people to travel more frequently. And then the next thing would be accessibility. Now, if you want to look at budget airlines, one good way is to just do a quick search on Google, and you can see that certain budget airlines are actually flying to cities that commercial airlines don't fly to. So therefore, the increased accessibility to different parts of the world can be a form of explanation as to why there are more people traveling, which contributes to the increasing trend of tourism. And lastly, availability. This is something that's more straightforward. With budget airlines in competition with commercial airlines, people are now spoiled with choices, there are availability of more options, and therefore this can also help to contribute to the increasing trend of tourism, because now people have more options available and increase the chances of them traveling overseas. So now that we know why there are so many countries investing so much money into the tourism sector, because of the fact that there is increasing number of people traveling around the world and there are so many possibilities that can be gained, we have to look back at the overarching question again: is tourism the way to go? So first of all, of course, we have to look at it from both perspectives. Yes, it's the way to go, especially for countries that are heavily dependent on tourism sectors for their economic development. And in this case, usually when we are explaining this point, we're going to link to all the economic possibilities and benefits that individuals and countries can gain. And in this case, do you notice I mentioned individuals and countries? Now, there's a need to differentiate them, because let's say for individuals, when you're explaining about the economic benefits, you're going to talk about things like job opportunities or increased disposable income or increased purchasing power. But on the other hand, if you're looking at the economic benefits to countries, you're probably going to focus on things like tourist receipts, as well as tax revenue gained from businesses, as well as from the local citizens who have now had increased amount of income with more job opportunities that are available. So realize that there is a difference when you're explaining. So that's why it's important to specifically mention the economic benefit is actually focusing on the individuals or on the countries. Now, apart from the economic benefits, of course, with increased number of tourist arrivals into the country, especially for countries with cultural and heritage sites, then the amount of tourist receipts gained can be used to fund the preservation of such sites. At the same time, for countries that have a lot of scenic beauty, or let's say they have infrastructures and facilities, then in this case, they can use the tourist receipts to fund the conservation of the natural environment or the maintenance of the infrastructures as well as services. So now, of course, there are a lot of positive aspects to tourism, but the most important thing that we have to look at would be, with increased amount of people coming into a country, this can actually lead to great amount of tension. Now, what do I mean by tension? It can come in the form of tension between the tourists and the locals. So in this case, it can be something as simple as because of the fact that tourists and locals are from different backgrounds. Therefore, sometimes the actions of tourists may seem to be disrespectful in the eyes of the locals. That's one possibility. And then at the same time, tension can also come in the form of tension between the tourists and the environment. And in this case, it can be due to, let's say, if there are a greater amount of tourists come into the country, negative tourist behavior such as littering can actually lead to pollution and long-term degradation of the environment, or even things like, let's say, sheer volume of tourists visiting degrading a natural site, it can erode the pathway, which can lead to long-term irreversible degradation to the natural environment as well. So in this case, with all these impacts, with all these tensions, it can lead to social, cultural, as well as environmental consequences. Sometimes it may be long-term consequences that may be irreversible. Alright, hope by now you should recognize that I didn't point out one of the negative impact, and that is the economic impact. And if you recall just now when I mentioned about economic benefits, now think about this, economic benefits are usually applicable to most of the countries that are developing their tourism sector. As long as there are tourists coming to the country, definitely there will be some form of revenue that can be gained. But if we look at the negative economic impact on the country, you would realize that it's actually not applicable to all countries, but instead is applicable to some countries such as those that are experiencing 4 seasons, and that their activities, tourist activities, are conducted during certain seasons. And in this case, if the country really develops themselves to cater more to the tourist needs, then they will realize that at certain times of the year, such as let's say Hokkaido, in the winter months versus the summer months, during the summer months there might be underuse of facilities and there might be unemployment of people because of the fact that tourist arrival rates will be very low during these non-peak seasons. Alright, so economic impacts, the negative impacts, are actually applicable only to a small group of countries. So this is something that you can also take note of when you're doing your revision. So now that we have weighed the positive as well as the negative impact, now we have to think about how then can we ensure that the benefits that countries can gain through tourism can be something that's more sustainable. So in this case, it requires the cooperation of many different groups of people, and this is something that is highlighted in Gateway 3. So as you're reading through Gateway 3, you should realize that there are a couple of different groups of people that are highlighted, and those include the visitors, the tour operators, the local communities, the planning authorities, as well as the NGOs. I think it's good to actually bring out the fact that in order for tourism to be managed sustainably, you actually require the cooperation of all the stakeholders, and no one group in particular will actually allow tourism to be managed in a sustainable manner. Okay, so that's something to take note of. But at the same time, as you are mentioning about the management of tourism, it's also good to bring in the idea of sustainable tourism in a form of ecotourism. And in this case, you can bring examples like Australia, New Zealand. These are the few countries that are really implementing ecotourism. And one interesting thing that you should notice is that the word ecotourism can be deceiving, where you can assume that it's only focusing on the conservation of the environment. But it's also important to take note that ecotourism also serves as a method to help to improve the well-being of the locals. If you're actually signing up for an ecotourism tour group, you will notice that they will bring you to the local businesses, so that when you're making purchases, actually the amount of money that you spend goes directly to the locals rather than being leaked out into the international economy, because most of the time when we travel, we tend to go for brands that we are comfortable with, that we are familiar with. So in this case, ecotourism can help to reduce and minimize leakages, so that this can actually help the local communities gain more economically. Alright, so I hope this video serves as a good overview of the entire chapter. And like I said, if you are addressing any chapter, the first thing to do is to actually look at the overarching question and think of ways to answer it from different perspectives. And of course, at the end of the day, consider different geographical concepts as well. And in this case, the best geographical concept to help you better understand tourism would be to think about the long-term and short-term impact or consequences. So at the end of the day, is tourism the way to go? The answer is yes, especially for countries that are heavily dependent on the tourism sector for their economic development. However, if they want to ensure that they reap the benefits in the long run, then the country will have to ensure that all the stakeholders play their part in protecting the tourist areas as well as to promote sustainable tourism. If not, right, then if tourism is not managed in a sustainable manner, then all the negative consequences that we've mentioned will take over, and the country will now have to experience a severe blow in their economic development, because all the economic benefits that we have been mentioning will be something that the country cannot rely on in the long run, especially with the degradation of the tourist site itself. Alright, so I hope this video is useful for all of you, and like I said before, if you have any questions, feel free to drop me a comment below. If not, you can DM me on Instagram or any other platforms that you can find me on, and we'll see each other in the next episode.